after the presentation, she came up to me and she looked me in the eye, and she looked like my grandmother. And she said, I'm saying in Spanish, she said, "Maestro, eso no es para gente como nosotros," which means, teacher, professor, that's not for people like us. And
that's so sad.
And, it hit me so hard. These are people who have, she was a grandmother. She came to the US later in life. She gave up her whole life. She left everything that she knew to come to the US to start a new life for her kids and for her grandchildren. So when you think about we talk so much about risk and investment and portfolios, this was their risk and this was their investment. And I'm, in my mind, I'm like, if it's not for people like you, then who's it for?
Are you going through life blind? This is Eyes Wide Open with Nick Thompson. On this podcast, we share knowledge and stories that build human connection while elevating stigmatized societal issues such as mental health, holistic wellness, culture, free speech, and more. All to ensure we show up in the world with our eyes wide open. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Eyes Wide Open. Our guest today is Dr. Paul Rivera. Dr. Rivera holds a PhD in economics. He's a globally renowned entrepreneur, professor, strategist, international developer, professional, mentor, former diplomat, lifeguard, paramedic, former wrestler, and a father. I think we may have answered that first question already of what you wanted to be when you were growing up and how that changed over the years, but this will be fun to unpack. He's also the co-founder of BX Change, promoting his mission of igniting profound growth and the alignment within individuals and organizations. So thank you for joining us today, Dr. Paul.
This is a huge pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
It's my pleasure. As I was saying before we were recording, I'm really interested in the work you do and learning more about your inspiration and everything. I also can't wait to hear about all of these things you've done in your life. So what did you want to be when you were growing up as a little kid, and how did that change throughout the years to lead you to where you are now?
It's a great question, and it's one of the part of our coaching business. We work a lot with clients, and that's actually one of the first questions that we ask people, because it kind of gives you a center point, because it talks a little bit about your values and what really matters to you. I hope that many of your listeners are close to my age, at least, because who I wanted to be and what I wanted to be when I was little was Jacques Cousteau. And I don't know if that's something that translates to this day and age. But for those of you who don't know, Jacques Cousteau was basically the inventor of modern scuba. He was a French sailor and scuba diver, and he's the one who basically invented the tanks that don't have to have a cord that goes all the way up, right? The self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. He's the guy who made it.
I didn't know that. Yeah. That's actually really cool.
And so in the mid-late 70s and early 80s, when I was growing up, he had a TV show, and this TV show was called The Underwater World of Jacques Cousteau. And he would go out with his brother and his crew, and they had their ship, the Calypso, and they would explore the depths of the oceans and all of these things. And what I loved about it, like why I wanted to be him pretty much, was because he was one, incredibly competent and like knowledgeable in the things that he did. And I loved that. Just seeing somebody who was so passionate and so immersed in what he did it was really inspirational to see him. Second, though, was that I loved how he went all over the world. He talked to people all over the world, and he interacted with people in such a genuine way. Right.
And that's what I know him for, by the way, not the scuba thing. Yeah,
exactly.
That's interesting.
So, and as a kid, I grew up as a Latino child of immigrants in Los Angeles, and my world was pretty small. And I was always the one in my family who had a vision of something bigger, something more. And he was my window. Jacques Cousteau was my window to what that something more could be, so
that's
when like you read off all the stuff, which, to be fair, is only about half of the jobs and different things that I've done, but for me, I learned through that whole experience and kind of wanting to be Jacques Cousteau that I value growth. Growth is what's really important for me, so as I've gone through my life, and I have a good amount of retrospective now and looking at the things that I've done, I'm actually really proud of myself in a lot of ways.
As you should be.
I've gone all over the world. I've traveled everywhere. I've met people of every variety, of every religion, from every country, pretty much. And it's been a growth experience for me from the get-go, and to the point where I'm always still, how do I say, like, my mom asks me all the time, aren't you tired? Like, don't you just want to stay home? And I'm like,
tired listening to you talk about it. So.
And I'm like, absolutely not, because that's what fuels me. And that's what keeps me going. And I love constantly being and putting myself in a new situation that I haven't been before, because that's where the growth comes from. And I think that's the legacy that came from Jacques Cousteau being my childhood hero. And I feel like I've lived it pretty well so far.
That's really cool. And so I think you're the first person to say they wanted to be somebody, where a lot of people are like, oh, I wanted to be like Madonna, or I wanted to be like this, or I wanted to do this. So I think that's really cool. But what I find fascinating about this question and why I ask it is because I learned early on doing this podcast that everybody, when they're young, they have these like grand dreams of what they want to be. They want to be a celebrity, an actor, a movie star. Me, I wanted to be a professional wrestler, and it's always, or a writer, and it's always these like great things, and then they kind of get off track somewhere for a variety of different reasons. But
right.
to have someone kind of like take away, I think you might, I don't want to say the first person, because I've had a lot of guests at this point, but to like kind of take away the piece of that and apply that to your life is really cool. And I relate completely too, because growing up, middle class, working hard, divorced family, all sorts of financial struggles my parents went through, sometimes putting food on the table, roof over the head, all of that stuff. Yeah. And I always saw the world bigger too. I always just saw it so much bigger, but I saw it that way through professional wrestling and through movies. And how I just always thought that there were like these other worlds, and the whole storytelling element, which I know is key to you too. So that's super relatable. And I love hearing that you kind of like applied what it was about Jacques Cousteau into what you do.
And I mean, to be fair, I mean, I think as listeners hear me say things like that, it's, you got to know that that's not something that I necessarily did consciously. That story, as I tell it now, is me having gone through a lot of work to understand my childhood and what were the influences in my childhood, and just to sort of piece that together and go, dang, you know what, there actually was a tremendous amount of coherence in the things that I was doing over time. And I didn't always do it consciously, but there was something inside of me that was always driving me in that direction. So that's cool. It's important to say, because that as you talk about these things sometimes, and I've been interviewed enough about these kinds of things, it's easy to make it sound almost contrite, but the truth is that ability to tell that story in that way comes from a tremendous amount of inner work, which is really important, because it's important to see the coherence in your life, that despite the fact that things may not have always gone how you might have wanted or how you might have expected, that there's always that inner part of you that's driving you, that is undeniable, that's unstoppable, and that's going to keep going. And it's so, and then the power of seeing it and acknowledging it, and then being able to live your life much more purposefully in line with that is tremendous.
That's what I think is so fascinating about where people end up in their life, and from a career perspective, or what they're doing with their job. And I know, so I've done a little bit of coaching from like a one-to-one standpoint, but what I have done a lot of coaching in is in my professional career. I'm in marketing. I'm a leader in marketing for software companies, and I've had to coach a lot of people. But what I find myself doing is, I know what I like about marketing. I like the storytelling piece of it. And when I go back and I look through all the things that I've tried, it's always been about storytelling and giving people sort of like the room to grow, the room to be uncomfortable, the room to push themselves to think in a different way, which is also what I do with this podcast. But it's funny, because a lot of people, I find, and I'm sure you find this on steroids, but a lot of people that I find, they don't really do the reflection part to see, like, what is it about this that I like or dislike? What are my values? Does this align with my values? values. And that's one of the things lately. I always say now this show becomes like a stream of conscious of what I'm working on myself in the moment. And so it's I've had like some career coaches on and stuff too. And it's always kind of that same message of if you can do the work, you can reflect back and find like your passion, and the universe is speaking to you and guiding you if you listen to it a little.
I work a lot with sort of corporate type folks who come to me because they're stuck, they're looking for something, the next level in their journey. And they say to me, Paul, what I need is, you're really good with resumes. I need you to help me fix my resume. My resume is the problem. And I start asking them questions, and I look at their resume, and the resume is basically a task list. These are the things that they have done in these jobs. And I say to them all the time, well, but what are your values? Where are your values here? Where is your superpower in this? This is just a task list, And so as we start working, you realize that even to put together a good, powerful resume, there's a lot of work that you need to go, a lot of self-reflection that needs to go in it. And the resume is an interesting sort of opening for that for people, because a lot of folks are afraid of it. A lot of folks are afraid to critically analyze and ask themselves difficult questions, especially about childhood. A lot of people have childhood trauma and pain, and people are afraid to go there, and people are afraid that they will find out that their life has been wrong somehow, like I've led the wrong life, And I talk to unrelated but similar. I talk to a lot of like older Latinos who refuse to go to the doctor. And they say, you ask them, why won't you go to the doctor? And they say, well, if I go to the doctor, they're going to find something wrong with me. Right. And it's the same thing here. But I don't want to ask those questions, because I'm going to find that I did it wrong. And the truth is that it's what I said before. Your inner self always comes out a little bit. You're always, all the time. So we've coached thousands of people at this point, and not a single person, not a single one comes out of there going, man, I really messed up my life. It's completely the opposite. It's people saying, wow, look at all these connections I hadn't made before. Look at all the understanding that I didn't have before. And wow, how much better can I do it in the future knowing that? And that's always the result. I encourage people all the time that you need to start asking yourself these critical questions, because it's the opening to the life that you have always dreamt of for yourself.
Which is something I think people, like you said, you don't want to do the reflective work, because it's like when I go to therapy, sometimes I'm like, I don't want to think about the why. I don't want to think about how it's making me feel or how I'm reacting to it or something. It's just like that. Do you find with men particularly, because this kind of popped in my head when you were talking a second ago, but it's almost like, I feel like a lot of men are avoidant, which is our childhood trauma speaking out. I'm guilty as charged. I hate facing pretty much everything, it seems like, sometimes straight on, or at least without a lot of thinking. So do you think it's like a piece of avoidant from doing that reflection and just wanting to avoid, maybe you're doing the wrong things, or you've been doing the wrong things, or you avoid being sick?
I think so, but I also think that it's even deeper than that. Just one of the other reasons that I loved Jacques Cousteau was because he was an image of masculinity that I had never seen before. If you've ever seen him, he was a skinny little French guy. He was not aggressive. He was just competent and cool and amazing in all these really interesting ways. And it was the kind of man that I wanted to become, but it's not the kind of man that society says men should be like. Right. We're told, and I see it really heavily as a Latino and these sort of immigrant communities. But I know having talked to people all over the world that it's something that resonates way beyond that. But men are told that you have to be stoic. You have to be immovable in the face of pressure, that anything that means that you're disclosing your vulnerabilities, anything that shows your weaknesses, are a failure of you as a man. So men don't learn to communicate because we are chastised for it. We're definitely not rewarded for it. And it's something that influences and impacts our individual lives, our families, our communities, our societies. The fact that men are unwilling to say when they're not okay, when they need help, is something that I think is an epidemic that we suffer from, and it's really hard. Like when you've been trained your whole life to be a particular way, it's really tough to retrain yourself to say when you're not okay, and to create the spaces where you can express those vulnerabilities. Like I've been married once before. I'm married now. I've been married once before, and I know that the hardest part about my previous relationship was that inability to communicate. I was not somebody who was able to communicate when I was not okay, and I became a deep people pleaser, to the point where I began to lose my own identity, my own sense of self. And it blows my mind now to be in a different situation, to have grown so much beyond that, to have a partner who's super receptive and super open, and I know isn't going to judge me if I express those vulnerabilities to her. So it's such a journey. But the thing from the perspective of men, I think, is really, really important, that guys need to start opening up a little bit, creating those spaces, and understanding that vulnerability and expressing your vulnerability, in fact, is a kind of strength. I'm so strong, I am so secure in who and what I am, that I'm willing to show you what my weaknesses are, and I'm willing to accept you for yours as well. I think you touched on something that sort of talks to my heart, because I think it's something that really can transform societies.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And a lot of the advocacy work that I try to do, and it's funny you mentioned the listeners earlier, it's spread out a little bit now, but it used to be like 96% women that were millennials. So it's changing a little bit, but that's kind of where my audience is from. But the whole men's mental health, wellness, toxic masculinity, whatever words, you could throw all the buzzwords out, right? But what I found from my experience, and I am very well aware of how I behave now when I'm not okay. I'm still working to do better on how to express it and how to manage it. I think we all will. But man, I think about how I used to be so reactive, easily irritable, frustrated, quick to lose my temper, I guess. And I look back on like my whole family experience, and it's like, well, that's where that came from. And it just, the generational piece of it just comes down to men. And then I also agree that it is a strength when you can express yourself, even if it's just a little bit at first, because not only are you strong for doing that, but you're doing it in a society that is just learning how to accept that from a man. And that societal impact and that stigma, like that is its own beast to overcome mentally, for anyone really, but especially I think in some cases for men.
Yeah. It's I speak a lot to a group of people that I call trailblazers, and it's people you're a trailblazer. You're doing it for the first time. You don't necessarily have a role model. You don't have a blueprint to go by. Exactly. And so everything feels really risky a lot of the time when you're out there trailblazing, and that there are people who will judge you for it, and who will they're not ready for your journey yet. And you have to have the confidence, the security, the knowledge that this is taking you in the right direction to keep pushing, because the truth is that the louder the haters are, most likely, the more they need to hear the message that you're putting out. So
I completely agree. And as with my online presence and talking about men's mental health and just the internet in general, it's so much easier to be cruel. People are so much more likely to send a nasty comment or a DM or talk about you in like negative ways. And a lot of times I actually think these people don't even know that you see it. I think there's such a disconnect there that the internet gives, because half this stuff is not something people would say to someone's face, or even to someone else, maybe like behind their back, but not to the extent that they do on the internet. And where I think that hurts especially, like men, which we're talking about, or other other areas where it's difficult to express yourself, is that it just kind of amplifies this negativity, which makes it even scarier than opening up to your partner or opening up to a close friend or something like that.
I could not agree more. There's so much of the internet, people don't realize that there's someone on the other end of that comment who's
So
receiving
right.
it, and it has an impact. It's a voice that you're hearing. When in starting our own business, there's been a good amount of social media presence that we've had out there, and it's painful to see those things when especially when you're like us and we're putting out what we see as a message of positivity and a message of empowerment. And man, I don't see anything. It's hard for me to understand how somebody could find negativity in the things that we put out, and yet people do. And it's a blow. It's tough. You've put yourself out there. Not only did somebody put it out there, but everyone has seen it. And you have to take a minute to recover. You question yourself all the time. That self-confidence takes a hit, and you have to remember. My wife actually has a really interesting thing that she does exactly in those situations. She has an archive of all of her testimonials.
Of the people she's worked with.
People she's worked with, lives that are eternally changed for the better because of the work that they've done with her. And oftentimes even people who've just read the book and haven't even worked with her, but really felt it, and anytime one of those haters kind of basically comes along, that's her strategy. She goes back to her testimonials and says, you know what? I've changed lives. I'm making an impact. I'm doing what's aligned with me. And it's part of your
really
resilience
smart
strategy. Yeah, it's part of a resilience
really
strategy, right? Life happens. Life is going to knock you down. Sometimes it's haters and trolls, and sometimes it's things that happen out in the world. And you have to know that no matter how much you try to be invulnerable, those things will happen. Life will happen. Even if you're not on social media, things will happen to you.
Oh yeah.
And you need those resilience tools. And those resilience tools, you need to use them regularly, not just when you're in crisis.
Exercise. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So
exercising is a lot harder when you
you.
haven't done it for 3 years.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. We have a quote that says basically it's a lot harder to speed up from a slowdown than to restart from zero. Basically, right?
That's
So the resilience tools, keeping them with you all the time. When something hits, sure, you slow down a little bit, but you're not starting from ground zero. And it's a lot easier to get back up and keep going.
Yeah, that's very well said. And that's a very good point. And I know I have my tools too, and some of them aren't very healthy, I would say, but they're there. But they're there.
But they're tasty.
Right? Yeah, they are tasty. They were in the form of 2 donuts yesterday. So that was.
I'm not a big sweets guy, but man, I love donuts.
Me too. I'm not a big sweets guy either, but donuts are just, and I'm gluten free. So when I have a gluten free donut, it's a rare occasion. And I was visiting the Willis Tower yesterday for work with my coworker, and there was a Do Right Donuts, which I'm in Chicago, by the way.
Yeah.
This place, I'm telling you, their gluten free donuts are the best donuts I've ever had. Period. Not just gluten free. Period. So highly recommend to anyone there. And this is not an ad.
I spend most of my time in the Dominican Republic, where they have donuts, but if you grew up in the United States, it's not quite the same, the local donuts, but they opened Krispy Kreme here. It's dangerous. It's my downfall.
Those just slide down like water. Oh my gosh. I remember when those things first came out and there were just lines out the Krispy Kreme.
Yeah.
Just lines of cars and lines of people, and they just hand you one when you go in and you're just already like addicted. It's just
I know.
So
I don't know what
good.
they sprinkle on those things, man, but it's amazing.
It's just more sugar.
Exactly.
It's just more sugar. Yeah. And one other thing I think too on the resiliency thing that's important for people is when you encounter a roadblock or a pothole, I like to call them, where it's something that's going to slow you down, even if it doesn't stop you. If you have the ability to like look back on something or find that conviction in you. Like that's what I find. Like I have to find that conviction in me, especially because some of the work I do is not easy, and a lot of people are judgmental and mean. And this is the other thing I was going to tell you. The amount of times over the last 2 years that I've had any kind of public presence, the amount of times people are like, man up, quit being a baby, like it, among other things, right?
Right.
Words that are more degrading. But I'm just sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, like, how much this is about you and not me. Like if you don't have to agree that a male or a person should express their feelings or when they're not okay or how they're feeling about something, but to go out of your way to say something that's like, man up, it's just such a thing about that other person and not about you.
Absolutely.
That would be my
That's
reminder to people.
yeah.
Right? It's crazy. And I think too, oh, go ahead.
No, please.
I was just going to say, I think back, I've been thinking a lot lately, as I kind of mentioned, more about, because now I know what I do that's like childhood trauma or something, but now I'm looking back and really looking into the behaviors that developed from it instead of the why, but like the outcome of it. And so one of my responses is that when I'm not okay, which I grew up with two sisters. They became best friends. And then I was kind of left to my own devices, became an introvert or was an introvert all along. And so my biggest response is kind of like, I just withdraw when I'm not doing okay. I just withdraw. You won't see me on social media. You won't see me in real life on social media or anything like that. But the behavior that really came out of that was like the isolation thing, yes. But then I realized like I deflect and I start checking on other people when I'm not okay and making sure they're okay, which is such a like the opposite of like what you should be doing, right? Like I should be telling people I need support or help. But anyway, so if you really do that introspective work, a lot of the times you can realize that there are people in your life that are good for you and that you maybe have developed these unhealthy patterns to managing your stress, your anxiety, your depression, or whatever that might be.
I will tell you something you said made me think of a story and how sort of these things affect you and how they manifest, and in particular the sort of man up thing. So the story goes like this: I have an aunt who's 10 years older than me. And when I was little, I was about 5 years old. She was almost 15, so she was getting ready for her quinceañera, right? Her Latino Sweet 16, right? But and I was her dance partner. I was her practice partner because they do all these big dances and whatever. And so I was her dance partner. I was a kid, right? I was 5 years old. And we would put on the records in my grandparents' house, and we would dance, and we would have. It was great. I loved it. It was so much fun. Until one day, this guy who's at my grandparents' house, some friend of my grandpa's, I don't remember who it was, saw me there dancing with her. And he said to me in Spanish, basically, he said, you look so pretty dancing. Basically, and in Spanish, words are gendered, right? So he used the feminine and told me that, oh, you look like such a pretty girl dancing.
Jeez.
And I saw that my dad heard it and my grandpa heard it, and it was just an immediate wave of shame, right? Like, just I was frozen. I was mortified.
And so little.
Yeah. So when you think about the consequences, the actions that go after that, I never danced again.
Oh my gosh.
I never danced again. I refused to dance. I refused absolutely to dance for about 35 years. I couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I saw it as the most unmasculine, feminine, effeminate thing that a person could do. But I carried that trauma from that time, So when somebody, that's the effect that it can have. When somebody says, man up, or, things much worse than that, that's the lifelong effect that it can have.
It almost creates like a self, like you said, shame, but I'm sure he didn't even mean it to be that way. Like I sometimes wonder if our parents knew, like if they looked, if there was a way for them to like look back and see the little things that they did that were so damaging to the people we would become, I wonder like how that would make them feel if they could even address it or understand it.
It's really tough. I mean, you kind of have to have a little bit of sympathy for them. They're going through life for the first time too.
I say that too. Yeah, I said that with a therapist on my show a couple of weeks ago, Therapy Jeff, and he was like, "No, they need to do better." I'm like, "Okay, that's fair."
I mean, I don't disagree with that either. But you know, I look back at my parents, and you know, mom is very much a narcissist, and not in the sort of popular way, in the literal clinical way, you know,
Right.
and that's really tough to grow up in that atmosphere, because you realize that the love that was given to you was not for you, but for her. And you know, just the toxicity that goes around that, and my household, because of that situation and the dynamic between her and my dad and all of that, was a situation where everything had to appear nice. There was always a nice smile, and everything was okay. And you didn't talk about anything bad, anything difficult, anything ugly, you know. So add that to sort of the social pressure of being a man and having to act macho. And I'm in this particular enclave where that is just distilled, and that's
and your people pleasing you mentioned earlier is coming
pleasing,
from that.
the whole exactly. So you know, there's so much to unpack, and I can see why people don't want to talk about their past sometimes, because that's where so much of the darkness lives. But at the same time, for me, it's been liberations on the other side, you know?
Right.
So,
well, that's what I think too, particularly with men. I mean, I would say this is with anyone who, but let's stick to the context of men for the point of this conversation. But I remember I did therapy for the first time in my early 20s. I was probably 21 or 22. I was not ready. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know. I thought it was all done in the session, right? Boom. You're like, here's your medicine. Here's your cast for your broken arm. Boom. Right. I didn't get very much out of it because I had no idea what I was doing. And when I tried again in my early 30s, I was at this point where, first of all, I had hidden my depression from no one knew. Even it took me probably 6 months to like actually say it to my therapist, who of course like already, but but I remember like I didn't tell partners, girlfriends, none of that. And I would just have these bouts of where I would just withdraw or you know, be different, like just be acting different, right? And that causes so many problems for your relationship or your friendships or anything like that. But then what I think is so good, once I got in there and I started doing the work and I started thinking about why I was doing the things I was doing and how I could be different and what were the things I need to put boundaries on and stuff, it does suck in the moment. It sucks to look back and realize how much of your life you spent in a certain way of doing things, in a certain pattern of thinking. But to your point, like the liberation on the other side, it makes it worth it. And to know that you can like really free yourself of so many of the things that you may not even know that are held up in you. And by the way, I'm of the belief that those traumas hold up and manifest themselves physically as well. So it isn't just the you know, the angst or the anxiety or the depression or the mental health challenges. So I just want to encourage anyone, like if it's scary to you and you want to avoid it, like that's when you should step into it. Because if you do the work, and I have this in my mission statement for the show, if you do the work, you can show up in the world with your eyes wide open. Right. And it's such a better way to live, even though it sucks while you're going through some of it. And there's a lot of forgiveness you need to do for yourself, for the people in your life. And that's hard. But if you do it right, it helps you see things more clearly. It helps you show up in a way with the people that you need in your life in a way that works for you. And it may not always work for them, but it works for you. And you can really just release yourself of so much of I always say it's like angst, this just ball of tightness. I know I get it like in the pit of my stomach. And it's not easy work. And I think that's something that is scary for people too, is they know it's not going to be easy, but they only see, I'm like rambling now, but it's coming to me in real time, so bear with me. They only see the hard work, right? Because they don't know what it's like to live on the other side of the hard work.
That's right. No, and 100% aligned with everything you just said. I wanted to pick up on two things. One, that physical feeling, like the physical side, that how it impacts your body, that misalignment, that living with that angst, that grief in some senses affects you physically. And this is something really, really interesting. I work with an osteopath who, for a couple of years now, has been fixing my body and realigning my body and all of these things, which has been magical. And that's a topic for a different conversation. But one of the first things that he showed me is he showed me where in my body I carry my stress. And I'm somebody who, since my early 20s, has had lower back, like pretty bad lower back pain, and knee pain and that sort of thing. And so somebody who's a professional and knows your body, can identify the root of that. And that it's so powerful for him to have told me, this is where you're holding your stress, your grief, your anxiety. And it's so fascinating, because now, as I'm doing, for example, I do a lot of meditation type work and intuition type work. I can feel myself focusing on that part of my body, and it really helps to align my mindset with my body, and to have those things sort of heal together is a really nice thing. So if, again, for the listeners, if you're somebody that you feel like you have chronic pain in a particular place, like my wife has chronic pain in the shoulders here, and she tenses it up and she holds it there, and so relating your mental state and your mindset to how your body is, and seeking to bring both of those things into alignment, is unbelievably powerful, actually, because you're leveraging the strengths of both of those things to heal you in a much more holistic kind of way, which I've become a huge fan of all of these types of things.
That's actually really cool. And I've never really talked about that on the show. So what are some of the ways that it's identified, and like, does it resonate with you? And they're like, oh, you're holding it here. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I'm holding it there. How can you, I
can tell you, in my case, like, whenever I'm having something tough hits me, and I'm down, whatever it happens to be, the next day I will wake up and my that left lower side of my lumbar is it's tight, it hurts, it's not okay. And I had never made that connection, because I was always looking for the physical thing. And I work out pretty regularly, and I think about it, and like the day before, I didn't do anything
what did I
weird.
Lift? Did I do squats wrong? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Was it my form? Was I off? Did I overdo it? And I could never think of anything, and once he made that identification for me, I was like, oh man, I had a crap day yesterday. XYZ went wrong. And the next day, boom, it's in my body.
There it is.
And you're like, man. And so now I can be much more proactive. I know that when I'm having a down day, I'm having something bad has hit me. I know that at night before I go to bed, I got to do my stretches. I got to do, the things that build up that resilience. It's part of my resilience tool pack, right? So that the next day I'm okay. I can stave off the physical effect of that. And that's both of these things. And it's so self-reinforcing, right? Because the next day when you wake up and you're okay, you're like, man, that worked. And so the next time that down thing hits you in your life, you're like, boom, I already know what I have to do for my resilience toolkit. And that's what's going to keep me going. And so that's the self-reinforcing part is really, really big.
That's really smart. I'm going to actually start doing that, because I actually hold a little bit in my back, I think, too.
Yeah.
Now I do have a herniated disc, so I'm sure that doesn't, but then there's days where it doesn't hurt, right? So I know there's other things going on there. But you said resilient toolkit a few times. Is that, like, what do you consider a resilient toolkit, or what are some of the things you think people should have in their resilience toolkit?
That's the thing. It's different for everyone.
Yeah.
It's different for everyone. I, for example, suck at yoga. Yoga is not relaxing for me. It doesn't do it for me. And journaling, I suck at journaling. Really tough for me. I know that it's so good for you, and it doesn't do it for me. My wife is a religious journaler, and that's part of her resilience. So she does sort of these real short journaling, like 2 to 4 minutes in the morning, 2 to 4 minutes at night. And it's really nice for her because she can see how she was feeling, relate that to how she's feeling now. And then on the positive side, also seeing when she was down and how far she's come. And so that it's a really nice log of who you are and you're feeling. It's a feelings log, right? It's seeing how you've progressed over time. I'm a perfectionist when it comes to words. And so it's hard for me to just vomit it out, what I want to say.
That actually makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense, because then all of a sudden you're not journaling anymore. You're like writing a professional
You're writing now,
or
right?
academic paper.
Which is a lot of what I do for my work. And so that's not really, it doesn't do it for me. So each person is different. So for me, 3 things for me. One is cooking. I love food. I love the creation aspect of food. And so I know that if I'm stressed, if I'm feeling the anxiety, my disconnect, my mindfulness is that I need to go make something. That's one. The second thing is exercise, as I mentioned. The body thing is really important for me. The third thing is breath work, and that's what works for me. I'm a tremendous fan of breath work. I didn't discover it until relatively recently in my journey, but I think it's also very connected to the exercise piece for me, because I think that the exercise feels good in a lot of ways because you're breathing, you're bringing in, you're hyper oxygenating yourself in a way that you don't do in the normal course of your day. But the breath work gives you that oxygenation piece plus the intention. And for me, that's the best part of the breath work, is having that intention that you go into the session with. You have the session and you let it take you where you know you want to go and you need to go. So that's my resilience toolkit. But each person is different. So as I said, I've worked with thousands of clients at this point, and discovering their resilience toolkit is very much part of the coaching that they go through with me. But each person's is different. So
that makes perfect sense. And I know mine, what is mine? So it's funny because journaling, I'd never thought of this until you said it. I love to journal, but I do it very, almost like bullet points or sometimes just words. And it's not super detailed because, like you, I then believe I'm like writing my memoir.
Right.
And all of a sudden it's no longer relaxing. It's a lot of work.
Right.
So that was so relatable. I'm glad you shared that, because I never thought of that.
I will tell you what has worked pretty well for me. And I've been doing it recently. I'd spend most of my time overseas. And so for communications with family, I use WhatsApp. WhatsApp has a feature where you can WhatsApp yourself. And so basically I text myself some of these things. And that has helped me a lot, because exactly for those reasons. It's not a perfectionist thing. You're not going to write an essay on WhatsApp. It's just checking in with yourself, and it's there, and that feels pretty good. I think that's a gentle introduction to journaling for me. That's worked out pretty well. Yeah.
That's really cool. I actually like that. So everyone should do that. Check out WhatsApp and send yourself little notes.
Yeah.
So one of the things I really wanted to, the other thing I wanted to dive into, your second one was exercise. One thing I think has a stigma, what is exercise? I think people look at it and think, oh my God, I got to go to the gym. I got to go to the yoga class. I got to go to Orange Theory, like whatever this, and there's like a process. And I think a lot of us, especially now, I think people are making more time for that.
Yeah.
But exercise can be going for a walk. Exercise, like moving your body. And to get into like my resilient kit briefly, my biggest, most important thing in my toolkit is walks outside. And I don't even care if it's cold. I'm in Chicago. We have 8 months of cold for 4 months of pleasantry, right? But the learning to move my body and get outside and walk. And if it is bad weather, I'll like pace my condo. I don't care. If I'm on a call that's not on video, I'll pace back and forth, and it helps me concentrate more. But that moving my body and that getting outside and walking, I get 15,000 steps a day, except on Sundays, I allow myself to only do 10,000 steps if I'm having a lazy day.
Yeah.
And so those things, like, you just got to find them. But before I had walking, oh my gosh, like I'd drive everywhere all the time. I didn't realize the benefits of just moving your body and what that can do for your mental health, and honestly, your weight, your everything. It's just such an important thing to do. So encourage people not to always think of exercise as this, I've got to go to the gym, I've got to go to a class, I've got to lift weights. Whatever that is, it kind of makes you go, oh, I can't do that today. And just move your body. Just go for a walk.
There's all these great studies that have come out on longevity, and I don't know if you've followed any of this, but there's these great studies that have come out on longevity, and you look at folks that are sort of in rural Italy and the Japanese and that sort of thing, and they don't go to the gym. There's no Orange Theory. That's not what they do. They walk to the store. They do a lot of gardening, and it's really, and as you look at it, for example, as you see somebody gardening, there's a tremendous amount of stretching that's happening. They're bending down. It's a kind of yoga, right? They're walking by. I remember if you've ever been to Lisbon in Portugal, which is one of my favorite countries in the whole world. I love Lisbon, but I've
only been there like passing through in the airport. I need to go.
Gotta go. It's one of my favorite places in the world, and I've been to a lot of places, but that's one of my favorite. There's sort of a hill that overlooks the main part of the city, and I remember that I was there, and it was hot. It was August. I had my Camelback. I've got my water, and I'm trudging up the hill, and I'm sweating buckets. And this couldn't have been less than 70-year-old woman carrying 2 bags of groceries smokes me up the hill, because that's what she's done her whole life. Right. She's not working out, but that movement, that habit is incredibly powerful, and something that gets your mindset. And I completely am on board with the walking outside, like the outside, anytime you can do it. And it's not just for me. And I know that I go a little spiritual with it sometimes, because for me, it's not just the birds and the air or whatever, but I really like to go out there and I think about how I am connected to everything else.
Yes.
Right. So I feel that sort of universal energy that flows. I feel it the most near the ocean, which is why I'm calling you from Santo Domingo here, and I can see the ocean over there, and that's really important for me, because I feel that connection to that universal energy, and it's nice because I feel like I'm part of something, right? And I'm not religious in any way, and Catholic trauma and all of that.
Oh,
but
we could talk about that. I've got that too.
But
shame.
But I love that feeling that I'm something alive in the universe, and that I have a connection to all these things, and that's something that's meaningful to me. So and I feel that when I walk outside.
I feel the same way, and it's. You got me thinking about a lot of stuff today. Actually, I wasn't expecting, but I love the water. Like, I am so relaxed when I'm just sitting by listening to the water. Yeah. And I've got Lake Michigan 2 miles away, and I like never go. It's crazy. Like, I should do that. But the other thing that have learned to find so relaxing is just the light breeze of like the leaves. So if I'm lucky here. I've got a park right across the street from me, so I'm literally like looking at it right now. I can go out there, and there's a tree that I can just stand under when there's leaves, and it's just blowing, and it's just so relaxing to me. And I, like you, have some Catholic trauma, and considered myself more spiritual, I would say, right now, than no religion organized religion whatsoever, but I've been really trying to find ways to like find more experiences outside. And it's hard in a city too, right?
Yeah.
Where I can just listen to. And it's funny because on the other side of my place is another park that's for dogs. It's a dog park, and it's right by the highway. And it's like the least relaxing place you could, the least relaxing park you could probably be in. But it's just, yeah, that's interesting. It's good to find those connections and just remind yourself we're bigger. I don't think enough people spend enough time outside listening to nature.
Yeah.
And again, not just the birds or something, but finding that thing that makes you feel connected to something bigger. I don't think a lot of people have the time or even the understanding that maybe that would be beneficial to them, which is unfortunate.
Well, and I talk to a lot of people about time, and time is what you prioritize, and what you make time for is what matters to you, and it's easy to lose that perspective on the day to day, which is again, it's why you need to really consciously build these things in.
Yeah. How do you advise people build them in? Because I bet you get a lot of professionals that are in an office or strapped to their desk at home in their home office for 8-10 hours a day. And I know that used to be me, and I'd be like, oh my God, I've got 1,300 steps and it's 5 o'clock at night. Like, how do you advise them to work some of these breaks for mental and physical work in their day?
So part of it is I do a time analysis. So part of it is beginning with, let's go through your day. Take track of everything that you're doing in your day. What are you spending your time on? And then let's think about when is your brain good and when is your brain not good. So for me, I know for a fact between pretty much 2 and 4 p.m. every day, my brain goes into shutdown coast mode, right? So that's not going to be my creative time. It's not going to be my productive time. That time is tough for me. That's a really good time for me to go for a walk. It's a really good time for me to build that in. And it's understanding with the clients that, whatever that time is for you, for example, that's when you know that you're not working optimally, and your inclination is to sit down and buckle down more. So it's the thing where it hurts when I poke my eye, so I'm going to poke my eye more, So it's having them understand, like, you know what, you can get up, take a 10-minute break, walk around, get some air, come back, and I promise you're going to be so much more productive. You will have cleared out. You will have brought in some oxygen. You will have gotten some blood flowing in your body. It's good for you. It's good for your body. It's good for your work. And that's a big piece of it. So the high achieving trailblazers that I work with, they need to see how it's going to make them better, more productive, more,
Yeah. Well, you could sit in front of your desk for 8 hours a day, or you could sit in front of your desk for chunks of time with built-in breaks, and I guarantee you're going to be more productive. Just look at all the studies coming out about like a 32-hour work week. Right? People are just as, if not more productive, and it's because they're likely giving themselves more time to rest and recharge. And I, by the way, my premium times are 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and then like 10 p.m. to midnight, which is unfortunate times to have be productive. But in the morning, I'm not a morning person. I don't want to talk to anyone for like 2 hours after I'm off.
I was thinking also, I think it's slightly unrelated, but when I saw the title, the name of your podcast, Eyes Wide Open, I felt compelled at some point during this to tell you what came to my mind.
Yes, please do.
And it's a movie. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, but it's called Joe versus the Volcano. It's the first movie that Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan did together. It must have come out about 1990 or so, quite a while ago.
Okay.
Super interesting movie on so many levels. I think grossly underrated. I love it. It's one of my favorite movies. But there's a line in it where Meg Ryan plays 3 different characters in the movie, but one of the characters is saying to Tom Hanks, she says that her father told her that everyone you meet is asleep. Everyone you talk to, everyone is asleep. And the small few who are awake live in constant amazement. And that's what I thought of when I thought of eyes wide open, right? The people who are awake are living with their eyes wide open, right? They're the ones who are, and I think that terminology of living in amazement is exactly right, because when you are living with your eyes wide open, you see the magic, you see the beauty in things, and it makes you someone, I think, so much more appreciative of everything that comes
Gratitude.
around, the gratitude.
Yeah.
And we speak so much about the idea of like the person had childlike wonder, and they have that childlike wonder because it's amazing to them. They're seeing it for the first time, and they're seeing whatever it is for all the beauty that's in it. And that's something that you can have. You can cultivate that in
Yeah.
yourself, and it's such a beautiful way to live, because you apply it not only to things and places, but to people as well.
Yeah,
And
that's
as
true.
soon as you start seeing the amazement in people, the amazing things, as soon as you start appreciating the superpowers that each person has, it makes you so much more grateful, so much more open. And at least for me, it's been something that has become magnetic almost, that people sense that in me, and that their energy comes to me. And so the people that
Yeah.
are coming into my life aren't the same people that came into my life before. The people that come into my life
Yes.
now are those that are aligned with me, those that have something positive to share and want to hear what I have to say. And the whole concept of eyes wide open. I think it's the pathway to that amazement. And so I love it.
I
I appreciate the title of the podcast.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that too. And man, you're spot on. Like attracts like, right?
Yeah.
And that's why, one of the biggest things that I learned for myself, who would find themselves frequently kind of being the ear for people gossiping or talking shit, for lack of a better word, right? And I just remember, like, I had this revelation probably 10 years ago now, where I'm like, this is not the stuff I want to talk about,
Right.
right? And all of a sudden I removed myself from those types of situations and started having more conversations about the things that matter, the world as a whole, spirituality, and over time, not 10 years ago, but over time, like mental health and wellness and holistic health and all these things going on. And those are the things I want to talk about. I want to talk about ideas. I don't want to talk about
Ideas.
people.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so doing that was one of my big growth things to start attracting the kind of people that I want to be around and the kind of conversations I have. So I think I would encourage people, remember, like attracts like. Two pieces of advice I'll share there. If you're talking about people and not ideas, try finding people that want to talk about ideas. And then the other one that I would say is, if you're in a room where you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
You're in the
Like,
wrong
go find
room.
a better room. That's how you grow,
That's
right?
how you grow.
I feel kind of bad waiting this long to talk about this, but you've done so much work and you advocate so hard for the Latino community and Latino masculinity and all of that stuff. And I think you shared a little bit earlier without like using the terminology that I just shared, but um, how did you decide? Obviously, probably you're growing up a little bit, but like, how do you define, let's say, instead, Latino masculinity in its state, why it is that way, and like how you think it should be redefined?
Man, yeah. As you said, touched on it a little bit, but
I've got time. If you've got time, we can
I've got
go into
time.
it.
Um, you know, my upbringing was a very traditional Latino Hispanic upbringing. Um, and the idea of masculinity was that your value is in what you. I came from a very blue collar family. Your value is in what you produce with your hands, and you behave in a certain way. You have certain, which also means you have certain expectations of how women will behave, because masculinity in the Latino culture, it's machismo, right? That's what we call it. It's machismo. So machismo means not only how you have to behave, but also how you expect women to behave. So when we talk about the impact on families and societies and communities, it's because that's not just men, it affects everyone, right? So I would say that I wish I knew. The one thing in my why that I don't know is exactly why I always felt different. Why is it that I always fought against that? And that's not something that I ever identified as myself. I don't know that one. I can say that I had strong.
It's because you are different.
Sure. And,
that's
sure.
It's a simple way to put it, but yeah.
But the scientist in me wants to know the why, but I agree with you. That's who I am. I find it fascinating, so you see online, for example, a lot of these Latino accounts and memes, and they're funny about, they talk about the feminist wife, and all the comments are about, oh, your wife is broken, you need a new one. And it boggles my mind. I'm somebody who wants, for example, a spouse that's going to challenge me intellectually, that's going to challenge me emotionally, that's going to support me. But it would drive me insane to live with someone who feels like they are passively my servant. That would drive me insane. I couldn't do that. That would be really, really hard for me. And I think that more men than not actually in their souls and in their hearts feel that way, but that the way that society has conditioned us don't feel like they can say that. They don't feel like they can say, you know what, I want a true partner. I want an equal. I want somebody who's going to up my game and whose game I can up too, right? I'm a strong proponent in couples of what I call collective power. Right, you shouldn't be looking. I think it's ridiculous. I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, but
no, it's totally fine.
I think
it's great.
It drives me nuts when people say, for example, like it's the Jerry Maguire thing, the line "You complete me." I think that "You complete me" is too weak. It's not enough, because that imposes so much pressure on that person to constantly complete you. Right? For me, I think that a good relationship, is based on the understanding of collective power, right? That you and I together are a team, and what can we achieve together as a team, and how can we help each other build our collective power? And that's something that speaks much more elegantly to me even from, I say scientifically a lot, but I like the scientific way of thinking, right? This idea that you and I are going to leverage each other, and we're going to make each other better. I'm going to, that there's so much potential inside of each of us. And my job as her spouse is to help her see her own superpower and bring that out more, and vice versa. So, the simple "you complete me" seems really small sometimes, when I think of what could be,
Yeah, so I think you're right. I want that too, by the way. So,
and one of the things when I talk to men and when I talk to Latino men, it's really important. So my wife and I do a lot of speaking together. We do joint keynotes, for example, where both of us are on stage giving a keynote address, and it's unbelievably powerful for so many of these young Latino men, because they have never seen that. They have never seen a Latino man who's side by side with his spouse as an equal, and that they are a power couple. We both have PhDs. She has a PhD from Berkeley. She's a former diplomat too, and incredibly accomplished and well-traveled and the whole thing. And they've never seen that. So almost beyond any message that I might be able to give these guys, it's just seeing an image of what could be that's transformative for them. That they're like, wow, that could be me, because I look like them, I sound like them. Our family histories are the same. It's incredibly powerful. And I will tell you that I cannot get through one of those speeches, one of those presentations to these guys without getting choked up, because it's super emotional for me, because I see so much of myself in them. I see them reflected back. And, even though they could be my children at this point, I see them going through the same experiences that I did. And it's so gratifying for me to be able to show them at least a version of what could be, something so much bigger than what they've been allowed to envision for themselves. So that for me, the whole Latino masculinity piece really, really is that. It's showing guys that there's so much more out there than what you've been told, than what you think is possible.
I think we are shaped so much by our worldviews. And this is, I was on a reality TV show and I had my life kind of like on lockdown on what it was going to be before this. And this whole thing like opened me up to a whole new world of how damaged people are. But it also kind of gives me empathy for people, even people who are mean on the internet. I have empathy for, which is, I'm like, why, right? What's my why for that? But it's because I feel like, their world has been a certain way and it shaped their worldviews. And I think this is very similar to that. And I'm curious, like, aside from the work you're doing, what change do you see in the Latino community? And are people receptive to it after they see one of your presentations or interact with you and your wife?
So those are two, it's a macro and a micro question, right?
Right.
The macro question is change is slow. Change is slow, because at a certain, what you're talking about is cultural change. It's a cultural shift. It's a shift in the paradigm that we're trying to create. And that's very specifically and purposefully what I see as when I look at my own legacy, my own mission and vision. It's very much that. It's let's start shifting that paradigm and showing Latinos and showing Latino men that there is a different way of being. And so that change is slowly coming around, slowly, but entrenched interests are really strong, and interestingly, some of the people that you have to talk to the most are not even the men themselves, but the moms of young boys, because the moms of young boys are also the ones that are passing on these cultural elements to them, right? And it's really important to show these moms that the boys need to be taught that there's a different way to be a man. Right. And there's that the concept of masculinity is much bigger than what we've been told and what we've been handed as a culture. And so, it's a tough conversation a lot of the times. And that's the linkage to the micro, right? So after folks hear us speak, the students, the college students that we speak to a lot are really fired up and really emotional, and really inspired. And then at some point, after you give one of these keynote speeches, the kids line up and they want to talk to you and they want to take pictures and the whole thing. And they're super excited. And at a certain point, it hits them like, oh crap, but how do I do this? How do I do this? Like, I see you, I see what you've done. You've obviously worked your butt off and whatever, but how do I do this? How do I tell my mom that I want to do whatever it happens to be, and that conversation is tough. Conversation is tough. That's the one, that sort of micro conversation is really hard. I was a professor in a past life. I was an economics professor in California, and the university that I taught at was brand new. It opened the year that I joined, which was amazing. It was so like that idea of building something that didn't exist before is tremendous, right? But it was in California and it was in Ventura County, which happened to be at the time the largest county in the state that didn't have a public university. And Ventura County has a really large percentage of Latinos and first-gen Americans and first-gen college students and all of this. So it was really ripe for this community that means so much to me. And as a result, we would do a lot of outreach with high schools and, trying to get the students to come to a new university. And again, same thing. So much of the outreach is with the parents. The kids want to do it, but the parents are really hard. And I would have, I remember this one particular, she was actually the grandmother who was raising the grandson. And after the presentation, she came up to me and she looked me in the eye and she looked like my grandmother. And she said, I'm saying in Spanish, she said, Maestro, eso no es para gente como nosotros, which means teacher, professor, that's not for people like us. And
that's so sad.
And, it hit me so hard. These are people who have, she was a grandmother. She came to the US later in life. She gave up her whole life. She left everything that she knew to come to the US to start a new life for her kids and for her grandchildren. So when you think about we talk so much about risk and investment and portfolios, this was their risk and this was their investment. And I'm, in my mind, I'm like, if it's not for people like you, then who's it for? Because man, I don't know, but right. that's heartbreaking. Like I know that I will carry that conversation in my heart until the day that I die, because that hit me so hard that like, that's what let me know that this is really what I need to be doing. This is the message that needs to keep going out there. That this is how, this is the change that needs to begin to happen, to have the Latino community. And when I say the Latino community, that's the one that I'm most familiar with, but I know that it's true for the African-American community, for the so many other immigrant communities, not just in the United States. I've had the blessing to be able to travel worldwide, and I see it with Turkish immigrants in Germany, and I see it with Greek immigrants in Australia, and all of these things, places where people have gone in search of a better life, and they're hustling and they're making it. That possibility of having a life that you never imagined is not only something you have earned, but something that you deeply deserve. Like that is something that is your right to claim, so don't ever let anyone say that that's not for people like you,
Oh my gosh,
and it's tough. And I've seen it in my own life, in my own family. When I told my family that I had a sort of 9-to-5 job, and I told them I want to leave this 9-to-5 job and I want to go to graduate school and get a PhD. They didn't say it in those exact words, but what they meant was, that's not for people like us. Right. And when I became a professor and I said, I'm going to leave this tenured job and I'm going to become a US diplomat, they looked at me crazy, same thing. They didn't say it in those words, but I could see it in their eyes that that's not for people like us, And when I talk about trailblazers and the person who has no roadmap and no role model, I know it because I've lived it. That's been my whole life, is every time it's hitting that boundary and taking the leap, and hitting the boundary and taking the leap,
Yeah, I a lot of what you're saying really resonates with me, because I kind of feel similar.
Yeah.
Like my family's working class. I'm the only one that graduated college.
Yeah.
I'm a director in software marketing. It's funny because I have this new mantra that I've been telling myself the last couple of weeks, which is actually part of my resilience toolkit, I would say. But it was this reel that someone posted, and it was a doctor, and it was like, in case you need to hear this, and then it's a clip, and I don't even know what the clip is from, but I saved it. It's like, finish your story. When people tell you you can't, you should stop, or you should go a different direction, finish your story.
Yeah.
And so I've been thinking to myself now, when things get hard, you're in charge of your story. Finish your fucking story.
Exactly.
But and I feel like that's kind of the trailblazing element that you went through, where you looked around and everything in your worldview didn't make sense to you. So without a role model, without a mentor, you just started making a road, and that's the road you were going to take.
That's what it is.
There's nothing anyone can say or do to take you off that road. Well, maybe they can, but you know what I mean?
They can try.
There's nothing they can do. Yeah. To have that. This is really good. And I will say, I don't know a lot about the Latino community. I know some, like I have friends and, stuff like that. But what I think you're trying to do is so important from a macro and micro level. So I want to thank you for that, because I just want us to all live better, more fulfilling, lives and have inner peace. Because I think, and it isn't just this country, it isn't just, it's really the world. There's so much angst. There's so much of that physical, mental illness and struggles that we're all going through. And redefining, Latino masculinity for men and women, I think it's going to be so important. And it's like your little spot that you're making a difference. So I appreciate it. And
Thanks so much.
Thank you for that. And then on the micro level, you don't need me to tell you this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. There are people with the thousands of people you've talked to, and you've literally changed their life and their worldview to be something that's much bigger than they ever thought it would be. And that's the kind of work I think is admirable. So I think it's wonderful.
That's what keeps me going.
Well, on that note, before we go, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask me anything, but I'm struggling because I feel like it's not going to be as good as what you just said. So,
well, I actually do have a question for you. So, I mean, I know a little bit about you from what I see in the world, and I've listened to several episodes of your podcast. My question:
did you listen to the one on breathwork? I meant to ask you that.
I did. Yeah. That made me so happy. Man. That was tremendous. So I loved it. And I actually loved the way that he articulated some of the pieces of it, because I was like, yes, that's exactly what that is. So
that was a great episode.
I love that one.
To Pavel.
My question for you is, what do you see as your legacy? Like, when you leave this world, like, what do you want people to remember you for? What do you want people to say?
That's such a good question. And it's something I've been like really working on myself. Like, what's my why for some of the things I do? What's my legacy going to be? I actually had a call earlier today where I was talking about this with people. And my legacy, I want, and I feel sometimes it makes me sound like I have an ego. Like everyone has an ego, but like, I don't want to be the center of attention. I don't want to be, it was really weird experience for me to be on reality TV and have people know me for a relationship when I have so much more to me, right. and my activism and my upbringing and why I think the way I think and do the things I do. And so to be dropped in that world, it kind of made me reassess a lot of things. And one of them that I'm working on now is taking that experience and leaving like reality TV better than I found it. And I think that is not my legacy, but what my legacy is, or what I would like my legacy to be, my story to be, if you will, is that I took what I had and I took my experiences and I tried to service people in the best way that I can, and leave the world a better place than I found it, and do my part to try and, as I trailblaze, no, I haven't called myself that, but I think maybe that's a good way to look at it. As I trailblaze, like, I want a nice cement with lanes road behind me for others to come and follow on a much smoother road to where they need to go. So I think where I'm landing on that is just my legacy is going to be of service to making the world better than I found it.
Yeah.
And helping people. That's what I believe I've kind of circled around. That's a really good question.
That's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you asking that too. That was, it's weird. I'm telling you, like, these podcasts become like so relevant to where I'm at in my moment in that given time. It's just so funny to me because I'd never really realized that until maybe the last 6 months or so. But it's that's a great question, and really something that's been top of mind to me lately.
Nice. I appreciate you being introspective and honest with it.
Yeah. Can I just ask you one more too? And
of course.
What's your legacy?
You know what? I think mine is actually very similar. When mine, so I have we've developed a whole purpose methodology, right? And your legacy is a big part of that, your purpose. My legacy really came down to something very, very similar, and wanting to, I know that my superpower is actually helping other people see their own.
Yes.
Right. It's why I'm really good at the resumes, right? Because I can see your superpower even before you can, and I can articulate it. So my that's what I see as my legacy. Like when I leave this earth, I want people to be able to say, Paul made me see my strength even when I couldn't see it, and even more than I ever thought it was possible. No, and so awesome. Everything that I do that with that in mind. That how am I uplifting people? How am I uplifting those around me? How am I showing them their own beauty in the mirror?
I love that. That's so good. Much better than my answer. I'm like, mine's like a journal entry. I'm just blabbing out here, and yours is so it's succinct, but it's beautiful. And I think if more people, again, you got to take care of yourself first, right? But if more people looked at the world with that kind of beauty and looked at other humans with that kind of beauty, I think we would just be in such a better place. And that's, my whole philosophy is we are human beings first, which is why I can look past people who I disagree with and see the humanity in them. I can look to people that I don't like and find, the humanity in them and humanize them. And that's what you're doing with that. It's in their superpower. Make them a better version of themselves, empower them.
That's what it's about.
Good stuff. Well, where can people find you?
Yeah.
And then what, on top of that, which you can touch on, like what kind of services do you have with Be Act Change?
Cool. Yeah. So we're pretty easy to find. We have a website, beactchange.com, which is undergoing revamping, but it should be fully up to scale soon, which has been too long of a process, but I'm really looking forward to beactchange.com.
Are you doing it yourself, or do you
have
like a web?
Okay. Lord, no. God. But it's the website thing is super interesting. It's such a process. And if you don't, there's an art to it, and the person who's helping you with it has to understand where you're coming from and what you mean and what you want to convey to the world when they see it. The attention spans are pretty short these days, so you want it to speak to who you are as soon as it lights up, and it's actually not as easy as you would think that it is. So that's been a process.
I do ours for work, and I'm like, thank God there's people that like doing this, because I don't.
and it's fascinating, and it never really occurred to me that there's people who handle the code, the technical side of it, but there's an art to it. There's a web design piece and that they're not exactly the same. They link obviously, but it's not the same. So anyway,
one of my best friends does UX development for web. So
no, it's fascinating. It's a whole new world for me, and I've really enjoyed learning about it. But that's us. That's beactchange.com. We have a nice Instagram page, which is pretty fun. That's b.act.change. And then you can find me on LinkedIn, which is where I'm probably personally most active. So Dr. Paul Rivera on LinkedIn. So Be Act Change is our business. It was born out of, my wife and I run it together. It was born out of our experiences, both in really traveling the world and as international diplomats. And is really, really fascinating world to be in when you're in the same day, for example, in high-level negotiations with the Supreme Court, with the Ministry of Justice or whatever else, and on the same day working with local fishermen and farmers and all of that. And it requires you to have a certain flexibility and versatility, but more than anything, a great capacity for listening. And that's something that people are not always very good at, and they're not really trained to do that. You're trained to be a technical expert, right? You're trained to be a democracy expert, a sanitation expert, a health expert, or whatever it is. And you come into these spaces wielding your technical expertise. When there's so much humanity that has to be there, you have to build those relationships first. And you have to understand when you're in these negotiations, regardless of who it is, what the purpose is, what's the mission. And so that whole concept is really what launched Be Act Change for us. So our thing is helping people and organizations find their mission, vision, and purpose, create alignment around it with their actions, and create the resilience so that they can keep going when life hits them. So we work with individuals. We do a lot of work with corporates and corporate teams. We work with NGOs. And because of our particular niche, we also work a lot with different government entities and government agencies.
Well, they need all the help they can get. So it's refreshing to hear that. That's wonderful. And all of those links are going to be in the show notes if anyone wants to check it out. Follow you on LinkedIn and follow Be Act Change on Instagram. And again, Paul, this was really a pleasant conversation, and your willingness to come on, I greatly appreciate that. So thank you.
No, this is tremendous. This has been a real joy, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. If you enjoy the show, the best way to support us is by sharing or dropping a review. For more information and content, check out engagewithnick.com or find me on Instagram at nthompson513. Don't go through life blind. Do the work so you can show up in the world with your eyes wide open.